Today's subject is going to be based on remakes. And I don't think there's any other way to explain about remakes other than the definition that I think people tend to get confused. There are two factors. There are remasters and remakes. A remaster is basically where they scale a game from its original formula and scale it up to today's current hardware in terms of visual aspects. You know, putting it outwards to 60 frames per second and scaling it up to where it's like 1080 or something like that. That's basically what it is. A remake, however, though, is basically where a game is built from the ground up and reformatted and made for today's console performance. In other words, say for example, like that of Crash Bandicoot, Spiral, and Medieval. Those are remakes. And then, of course, you have remasters, such as the God of War series that have been remastered for PlayStation 3 and stuff. And, you know, the interesting thing is that I used to, for a long while, resented the idea of having to constantly do remasters. On the one hand, you know, it's great to know that, yeah, we're getting such remasters being put in today's current hardware and stuff like that, but the problem is, there's nothing majorly done except for just, in some cases, ports. And in a way, sometimes they're not that good of remasters, if you will. However, though, remakes, in my personal defense, I feel as if are more healthier for the gaming industry. I know for some people, they may not care for that, but the reality is that remakes is something that most of us actually want to see, especially depending on the game itself that's going to be remake. And really, right now, we actually have quite a bit of news in regards to remakes. You know, the first news isn't really news, it's more of rumors. But Bluepoint, after their remake of Demon's Souls, a lot of people are thinking that Bluepoint is going to be remaking Metal Gear Solid 1. To which I would say that would probably be an interesting game to see being remade, if not for the fact of two major factors. Factor number one, technically it's no longer an exclusive to Sony. Now, I'm not saying that Bluepoint is owned exclusively to Sony, but if you look at their track record, most of it is exclusive to Sony. So unless Microsoft, or Konami for that matter, paid a bit of money to where Bluepoint could in fact be allowed to remake this game or something like that, I don't see any other way of it actually being the next potential remake. Could it be? Yeah, and I wouldn't doubt in my mind that Bluepoint would do a wonderful job with it, much like how they did with Shadow of the Colossus. I have yet to play Demon's Souls because technically that's a PS5, and well, getting PS5 is about as easy as winning the lottery. The second bit of news is that technically Square Enix is signed up with Forever Entertainment, which is responsible for doing the Panzer Dragoon remake that was released a couple of years ago. And this kind of got me thinking to myself, I was like, so Square Enix is willing to try this one more time with another development team to do a remake for one of their properties. Technically, if you remember, the last remake they did was Final Fantasy VII Remake, Part 1, technically. And at the time, before it was officially made and released, it was given the project to CyberConnect. To which apparently Square Enix did not like what CyberConnect was doing with Final Fantasy VII. I don't know what it was that they were doing with it compared to what they're doing with it now, but at the time that they were developing it, apparently Square just pulled it from them and brought it into their own facility and had Tetsuya Nomura directing it, and so on and so forth, thus seeing the official release of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And so to see Square Enix teaming up with another team to do a remake, this makes it interesting because that makes me wonder what potential remakes could we see coming out of Square Enix, especially from Forever Entertainment that's doing the remake itself. We don't know right off the bat, but my guess is it's going to be something that hasn't been talked about, much less been an in-depth conversation for a while from Square Enix. So in other words, it could be a property such as like Parasite Eve, perhaps, maybe. Brave Fencer Musashi is a good choice as well. It's not sure right off the bat, because right now, Secret of Mana is right now something that's been kind of being remade, and, you know, depending on which one you're looking at, it's kind of varied in some degree, because you had the first Secret of Mana, the one that they tried to remake. While graphically it doesn't look bad, the problem is that it constantly crashes. I don't know if any of the bugs have been fixed, but if they have, great job. If not, still need to be worked. But then there's also the other Secret of Mana, so either way. Then there's the third bit of news, which is something that kind of disgusts me in a way, and one that I think a lot of people are talking about right now, as this conversation is kind of growing right now, and that is the fact that Naughty Dog has talked about potentially remaking The Last of Us. Obviously, due to how popular The Last of Us series is with Part 1 and Part 2, that's probably what it is. They're wanting to remake the first one because obviously they could. Just keep in mind, The Last of Us, the first one, was released towards the end of the PlayStation 3 and towards the beginning of the PS4's lifespan. Thus the reason why that it was released on PlayStation 3 and thus had a remaster release for PS4 technically. So could they do a remake by the laws of physics? I guess they could if they wanted to, although it sounds like they don't want to. It sounds more like a PR thing, you know, where it's like the developers themselves don't want to do it, but yet the higher up said that this is the best way to make money, and this is definitely not looking good, especially since people like myself and many others would want to see Jak and Daxter remakes rather than a Last of Us remake. In fact, what's funny is that there have been several surveys and stuff like that of where people have been asked about this subject and stuff like that, and it seems kind of even. There's such as many people who want it, such as so many people who don't want it, and some who just, like, it doesn't matter to them. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think Naughty Dog is using all of their resources. They're more or less sticking to whatever is doing the best. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we're seeing right now, is that it's not looking good. Again, would love to see a remake of Jak and Daxter, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, much like how we're never going to see a continuation for Jak and Daxter. And so with all this news and stuff like that that's been going on, I figured I'd go ahead and make this video talking about some games that I would like to see being remade for current hardware. Now, the thing is that while this would be awesome to see a lot of these games being remade, the reality is that it's up to the individual developers and the properties to decide if they're going to do that or not. Do I want it? Yes, desperately I want them as a remake, and for several reasons, but for some other cases, they may never actually get remade, so I'm just throwing them out there on the table, and if any developer decides to pick them up and actually remakes them, that's wonderful, that's great, that gets me excited, but I doubt most of them will ever happen. So the first game that I'm going to go ahead and just throw out there is Medieval 2. Now, while this may be a complete and utter shock, for some, it is not really that shocker, really. Whenever I played through the original PS1 halfway through, I was enjoying the game by itself. I just couldn't really stay with it because, unfortunately, the camera controls were utter garbage on the PS1. And so it was very nauseating. However, though, with the remake that was released for the PS4, this made me extremely happy, more so. And the demo didn't really do justice. I felt like there was something that needed to be finely tuned and stuff like that. Gameplay-wise was good, but I felt like the demo needed some kind of perfecting. Thankfully, most of that was perfected, actually, in the original game. And so, needless to say, Medieval Remake was a success in my opinion. Although I was very shocked to see that it was only just the first one, and not both 1 and 2, considering that the Crash Bandicoot series and Spyro trilogy was remaked for both of them, for all 3 games that they had on their respectable remakes. And so it's like, I was surprised to see those 2, but not Medieval 1 and 2, because while technically Crash Bandicoot and Spyro were both icons for the PlayStation system, Medieval is sort of like that secret icon that most people recognize, but not directly by Sony per se. And so I played a little bit of the second one just to kind of get this video fixed up and prepared and stuff like that. And I have to say that gameplay-wise, definitely feels nice, but the camera definitely could use work. In fact, I feel that the camera needs it desperately. So I would love to see a continuation for Medieval 2 Remake. Hopefully that will come someday. I'm still kind of shocked that we haven't gotten that when we had the Medieval Remake release. But I'm throwing it out there. I would love to see the second one being remade. The second remake, and one that might need to be a little bit explained, is Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. I actually said it right this time. Most people usually say /2. I said over, so it is technically over 2 days. So anyway, point is that Kingdom Hearts Days is basically a DS title, and if you are familiar with this game, you'll know that a DS game, especially on the caliber, well, look at how it looks. Pretty rough, right? So it would only make sense that a remake would be necessary to have for this game, you know? I mean, porting it onto consoles looking like this might be a bit weird, but if that was the case, then it wouldn't bother me too badly. But at the same time, considering the fact that we had the HD cinematic remasters for Kingdom Hearts 1.5 and then Kingdom Hearts 1.5 plus 2.5, if you remember. Yes, they only did HD cinematics. They basically put the story of Kingdom Hearts Days into 1.5, but that was it. They never went as far as to put the game. And if I had to pick between Days and Recoded, I would pick Days more, because Days actually has crucial information followed by a very deep storytelling, and might I add, a really good gameplay style for a DS game. Recoded, I would easily drop that into a trash can and forget it ever existed. But Days, on the other hand, is actually a more crucial story element, because technically in Kingdom Hearts Days, you play as Roxas, who is the 13th member of Organization 13. Also, Sora's nobody. And so basically you play as Roxas, who goes through the entire year while Sora is asleep and everything like that, as a member of the Organization 13, where your interaction with Axel, aka Lee, and also too another character known as Xion. I won't go into deep details of the story element itself. I feel like some people may be already familiar with this. If not, I would recommend looking into it yourself. This will actually explain a little bit in terms of how Kingdom Hearts 3 matches up and stuff like that. But aside the point, I still think this game needs to be remade. But here's the thing. If I want it remade, I want it to be remade but using the Illuminous engine, I feel. Technically, some people have actually done this project to some degree in the backgrounds. I know there's been like one particular user who was doing like an entire Kingdom Hearts story thing where they were playing the game series based on the story progression and stuff like that. You know, kind of matching it up and stuff like that. And when they got to about Days/Chain of Memories and stuff like that, they were kind of like between Chain of Memories and then Days and stuff like that. But instead of using the DS version of Days, they were using like a mod version of Days with Kingdom Hearts 2 emulator. And they were able to not only make Roxas a playable character, but they were also make a Xion model in the game, which is pretty interesting, I think. So in my personal opinion, I felt like if these people can do that, then why couldn't Square Enix do that with the Illuminous team, you know? Make a Kingdom Hearts Days remake, you know, using that particular style and everything of that nature. Now, on the other hand, if they felt like, no, it needs to be based on Unreal Engine, like how Kingdom Hearts 3 was, then I wouldn't argue about it, but I would feel a little bit odded about it, but at the same time, this is just from personally me thinking out loud. But again, Days needs a remake. The next game needs no introduction, but if you do need introduction, look it up. or I'll just do a quick brief description of it, and that is Blood Would Tell. Blood Would Tell is basically a video game adaptation of an anime/manga series known as Dororo, where basically a kid travels around with this other character known as Yakimaru, where he's trying to defeat the 48 demons that has stolen his 48 different body parts. And yeah, that's the story. But the game for PS2, I have talked about this multiple times. Ever since I first discovered it from Metal Jesus Rocks, I have fallen in love with the game to a point where I went on ahead and bought it on eBay for 125, I believe, at the time I purchased it, and played it, loved it, and I've talked about it ever since. Is it worth 120 or 175, whatever it's going for now? No, it's not worth that high price. But I will say that it is an enjoyable experience if you ever get a chance to play this game. But I would also say that I would actually like to see this game being remade. Now, there can be some complications with this ideal because technically, as of last year, Amazon Prime has actually had exclusivity for a series of anime known as Dororo, which is basically a remake anime involving the Dororo manga. So, yeah, there's that. So, some people may think, so you want this to be remade based on the anime of that? Not really. So, let me explain on that one. I would rather have them remake the original PS2 Blood Would Tell and remake that, use the graphical tone style and everything like that, enhance it and stuff like that, but keep the gameplay element and stuff, keep the original story and all that stuff. The reason why, and I had this thought for quite some time, imagine if Blue Point decided to just pick up this obscure title game and was like, hey, this actually looks pretty cool. Let's go ahead and remake this. Imagine how that would look. Keep in mind, Shadow of the Colossus as well as Demon Souls, those two remakes alone look mind-blowingly beautiful. I mean, if you want proof of evidence, I technically did a playthrough of Shadow of the Colossus for PS4 remake, and halfway through the entire game, I was crying because of how beautiful some of these Colossus actually look. Keep in mind, Shadow of the Colossus was already a classic whenever a lot of people was playing it back for like the PS2 and then the PlayStation 3 remasters. Now, for it being a remake, they look absolutely jaw-dropping gorgeous, and I just can't help but believe that Blue Point could do it again, but with Blood Would Tell. I want that to be the case. So, Blue Point, if you're watching this video or if you're listening somehow, please, if you could ever think of a game to add to the list of games that you want to remake, please look into Blood Would Tell. You won't regret it. It's really good, in my personal opinion. I love the game. But again, if Blue Point was to remake that game with the graphic tone and everything like that, because keep in mind, it looks pretty good on PlayStation 2, but imagine it being on like PS5, with that. Wow. It gives me chills thinking, imagining all that, really. Now, this one's going to be a little bit hard for me to figure out on, because while technically there are one or two cases, realistically, both would be better. It's like one or the other, but it's like, you know what, let's just go with both. And that is, of course, Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 6. Now, why those two games in particularly for a remake? Well, number one, Final Fantasy 1, it has room for enhancements. It has room for additional stuff and everything like that. And I feel like if you were to remake the original Final Fantasy 1, you could really get something going with this project. You really could get something here. Because here's the thing. Look at Final Fantasy 14. Now, I know that's kind of weird considering I had never played it, but I've seen a lot of gameplay and stuff like that. And I've seen a lot of the stuff that they've added through with these different installments and stuff like that. But I have to say, all the different jobs that are in Final Fantasy 14 alone, you could probably use those jobs and reinvent Final Fantasy 1 practically. You have all these different jobs, all these different abilities and stuff like that. It'd be interesting to see what you could do if you were to remake the first one, but have all these different jobs and stuff like that, I feel like that would be fun, people could just be playing it and then they can go back and replay it again and get a different experience because they're using these different jobs elements and stuff like that. I know some people would feel mixed about it, but at the same time, technically they've done this before. Keep in mind, the original one only had 4 classes, and then after that, they did a re-release of it for the PSP, also to the PlayStation 1, but the PSP had a more enhanced version, technically, where it had 2 additional jobs. And then, of course, the graphical detail was also enhanced, which looks nice for a PSP, mind you. But imagine if we were to remake it for current consoles. That would look pretty doggone badass in my personal opinion. Now, the reason why I also would pick Final Fantasy VI as well is because next to Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VI is probably the most popularly talked Final Fantasy game out there. And I know a lot of people have had mixed opinions, especially whenever I talked about Final Fantasy VI, you know, back whenever I did my top Final Fantasy games and stuff like that, ranking them and stuff like that. A lot of people felt mixed of me putting it as an S. I only put that as an S because I felt like that was a best representation of the RPG genre. Keep in mind, Final Fantasy is an RPG genre. Final Fantasy VII, yes, it's a good game, and yes, I do love it, but at the same time, I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's like the pinnacle of RPGs. Final Fantasy IX, I like it. I still like it to this day. Do I like it over 7? Naturally, no, but I still would put it as an A. Would I put it as an S? No, it definitely has something that would hinder it from being an RPG. But Final Fantasy VI, in my personal opinion, spot on. Everything that you do contributes to how you go about in the game. You know, rather all the armor, all the espers. These espers give you individual abilities that you will then use. You have different characters that you can get and stuff like that. Some of them being optional and stuff. And technically, as a remake, while most people probably wouldn't think of it, the only other excuse that I would have for a remake is to have the voice actor of Kefka from the Dissidia series voice Kefka in this remake. I mean, seriously, I cannot help it. It's sort of like the Mark Hamill of Joker, you know. It's like, that voice alone just describes Kefka's personality to a T. And if we had to have another reason to reunite that voice actor again, it would be for a Final Fantasy VI remake. I want that so badly. And one final game that I would like to actually see a remake of, and there's a couple of reasons for this. I know some people may not think of it much. In fact, some people would rather have the sequel rather than the first one. But I feel like the first one needs it more so. That would be Devil May Cry 1. Now, why Devil May Cry 1? Well, for 2 main reasons. Reason number 1, gameplay is kind of mixed, in my personal opinion. You know, Devil May Cry 3 has a concrete of what it wanted to be. It was literally what I would define as the first to define itself and to figure out what it wanted from the series looking forward. Keep in mind, Devil May Cry 1, 2, and 3 are all different in their own unique ways and style. But Devil May Cry 3 has been constant, looking towards like Devil May Cry 4 and even Devil May Cry 5. So when you think about it, technically they've kind of had the same gameplay element since the 3rd game. And so the first one, I felt like kind of needs a reinition, or reiniction, whatever phrase you want to use it, just kind of be paired up with how Devil May Cry 3 has been represented towards. Graphically, obviously, it would definitely look good, much like how Devil May Cry 5 looks. But the biggest thing of them all is the voice acting. Oh, dear gosh. Keep in mind, this was the early PS2 days, so bad voice acting. And I think some people would be like, oh, come on, it can't be that bad. Oh, you want to hear it, huh? Here it is.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light.
So yeah, if that wasn't enough of a ear-jerking, curdling moment of saying, yeah, a remake would be nice, then everything else should pretty much be self-explanatory, especially when you consider the fact that Capcom, while technically DMC didn't really right offhand kill it, I thought it did, but it didn't. Devil May Cry 5 proved itself that, hey, it has a good pair of legs, and it's coming back strong. And personally, I feel like, you know, to celebrate that moment, we need to kind of be like, let's remake the first one, considering the fact that the franchise has become quite so well known, in my personal opinion, and with Devil May Cry's successful uprising and stuff like that, definitely a remake would probably help kind of top it off a little bit nicely. Again, not a reboot, but a remake. So let's get that out of the way before anyone points into the comments and saying, oh, not the reboot again. No, this is a remake. Keep in mind, a remake, not a reboot. There's a difference. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. I know there's a whole bunch of other games that I'm sure a lot of people are going to be talking about in the comments below of games that they believe should be remade, and I can agree on any other level, especially games like that from like the N64, PS1s. I mean, I can understand, depending on the game it is, I can definitely see it probably being potentially a remake. And you know what? As years go forward, looking forward, there could be other games that could potentially be remade anyway. So it kind of makes sense as to how some companies may want to jump into certain ones. So you know what? We just gotta wait and see what they do looking forward. So thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.